Succeeding at anything in life takes work. I've been fortunate enough to lead a life filled with incredible opportunities, and I've interacted with many of the most remarkable experts in their field. It is abundantly clear to me that anyone can be successful if they'll just take ownership of their personal greatness and if they'll work on improving every single day. You simply must do the work, because if you don't grind, you don't shine. All right, I'm calling this the podcast to be named later.
Okay.
And I appreciate you taking your time exceedingly from your busy day, leading the free world and the automotive industry to some regard, and on the heels of the Mustang Mach-E, which I was blown away with. My brother-in-law Quinn and I were pretty impressed by the design and the performance statistics and what it looks like. And so we'll start big picture and then maybe backpedal from there. But how did you guys arrive at the decision that you wanted to move forward with an iconic brand like the Mustang and the fact that it's the world's best-selling sports car and you wanted to electrify it?
Well, can I make a statement first that I'm really honored to have JT Rogan here.
Thank you.
This is a high-quality young man who's been in service of so many people in his life. And when he called and said, can I sit down and visit, I was really keen to do that. I find myself in the middle of a Michigan State game last Saturday. Saturday night, fly to LA, Sunday rehearse, Sunday evening launch the Mach-E, Monday back in Dearborn. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And you're coming at a good time to talk about the design of this vehicle. The simplest thing, JT, to kind of cue to the audience is that in any endeavor, and in fact it extends beyond people, it's in nature, is life and its vitality is about how fit it is. So you and I both grew up in a world where we were measured athletically by our fitness, but I'm talking about competitiveness in terms of the design of a system, its ability to win, or in the case of nature, to live. And so when I came into Ford, I pushed on this simple thought that how fit are we? And in that, you do things like improve throughput or how fast your production systems can work, or errors that you want to reduce. All important things we worked on, like blocking and tackling. But innovation has a similar test for its fitness. So Steve Jobs, he changed the game. I've met Bill Gates, know him, I knew Steve. So these are two of the smartest people you'd ever want to be around. And yet one is winning more than the other in some realm. Bill won in some, Steve won in some. So I can prove to myself by seeing that as good as you think you are, there's always something that could be better. So this gets to the simple question of electrification. So many people had dabbled in it that we kind of backed up and said, how do we take what's already happened, which are socially responsible kind of vehicles that aren't very exciting. If they are exciting, they cost $200,000. How can we make something that's really exciting with the federal incentives in the mid $30,000 range? That was what we set out to do. And it was a really hard project, but yeah, Sunday we got to launch that.
And I saw you go through the media car wash there, and people really probing and wanting numbers and statistics and facts and figures, and that'll all be what it'll be. But this idea was brought forth with Edison and Ford over 100 years ago, and so why now, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say, because we got a nice text from Elon Musk saying, welcome to the electric vehicle. I didn't write him back and say, well, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford's first vehicle was electric.
Didn't know that.
Henry Ford worked for the Edison factory, so Edison was his kind of mentor, and they were both tinkerers and inventors. And yeah, so they make an electric vehicle and it works. It's the decision was made, the gasoline produces a lot more energy for a lot less cost. And so that's why it became the gas engine. It's still the issue today, is that gasoline still is more efficient in producing energy versus what does it take to produce a kilowatt. And in parallel, people will judge, well, one's cleaner than the other. It's not really true, because coal is used to generate more electricity in the country, in the case of the United States. So we call that wheel to well. We measure the carbon footprint. They're about equal. But we think that's going to change with sustainable energy practices to produce power, and the vehicle doesn't, has no emissions in the future. So it's the right platform to see happen. But yeah, it's in the blood of the company. In fact, hybrids, which there's a noted competitor in Toyota with Prius, but Ford was an early developer of hybrid technology, and today it's a big advantage. So when you're in my office today, we launched the Mach-E from Mustang 2 days ago. We just announced today the Lincoln Corsair. This is a small SUV that has a hybrid capability. So hybrids will generate 50 miles per gallon kind of range, and used to be a degradation of horsepower. The police vehicles that we're selling are hybrids. They got 420 horse in them.
It's pretty nice. What do you drive? How many horses you got in your car?
Well, I look at it in this way. I'm driving an F-150.
Okay.
And part of that is because I'm still built like a center, and I fit in it really well. But another part of it is I live in Michigan, and there's a lot of snow and practical. I go back and forth between West Michigan. So I drive the King Ranch version, which is, it's an extraordinarily popular vehicle. This is the #1, this is trivia, the #1 vehicle in the world by sales is the F-150. We sell 1 million of them. There's no other vehicle close to that.
Yeah.
So within that, this is the largest luxury selling product, because we have so many pickups that are sold over $100,000. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, so I'm driving that. But look, I've got a Mustang 350. This is the car of the year 3 years ago. It's a Cobra, and I just ordered the 500, which has won all kinds of awards. That Jay Leno, if our listeners like Jay's Garage on YouTube, there's a whole review of the gas Mustang, the GT500, and he just shared with me Sunday night, Jay did, that the hits on that, there's no other vehicle that's got this many hits except one. I'll let you guess. It was the Batmobile.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In the Chris Nolan movie.
Yeah.
The one with Heath Ledger as Joker.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Phenomenal vehicle.
So that vehicle is the most famous Jay's Garage vehicle. But I like being, in the real world, the fact that Mustang won that honor is cool.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So when you're undertaking a task like electrifying the Mustang, a huge undertaking, and so you've got to nudge some people, you've got to shove others in terms of leadership. Like, you really have to get people out of their comfort zone, because people have been operating to some extent in the same capacity for years or decades. And so this elicits the Bo Schembechler style of leadership, where it's urging decision making and independent thought, but then also collaborative unity and willingness to move forward with a plan. And so when you talk about how you lead the organization through such a transformative change, perhaps that can be revolutionary for the company going forward, how do you fashion yourself as a leader? Do you see that Schembechlerian, if that's a word, style, or how do you think that mirrors what you do at Ford today?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because he was a wonderful teacher and influence, both at two levels. To get to your point, is this unrelenting competition that he saw, that he wanted to be competitive. So I think I've channeled that from him. He's a lot more animated on the sideline than I am in here, but the fire is the same. And so I think, to your point, you're making me think this, that maybe the influence I had is, can we be more competitive in a space where we've either flown by or we're not present, this being hybrids and electrics. So my style is to get a bunch of people to see that opportunity. And what's cool about it, like in football, is if you can see yourself as a champion, you really love it when you think about all the hard work it took to get there. You could fantasize about getting the Super Bowl trophy, but when you hear them talk, think of interviews you've done, the athletes reflect on how hard they work to get there, because the joy is in that energy to do that, to conquer your own limitations. And I think instinctively, because I played athletics, and I had 3 brothers and my father all played college football, it was so competitive in the household that I try and push that. The other thing I always give credit to Bo for is teaching the soundness of integrity. So I'm often saying now, what kind of people do we want to be, and what kind of company do we want to have? Because the world kind of rationalizes the edges of this, and you really have a much better system as a leader if people just trust you. And that's at the fundamentals of trust is, do I believe them? Do they have integrity? So I'm in the interactions with our employees constantly. Of course, they're telling me honest things about the company. You just walked in after a gentleman came in and told me what it's like to be in the company in a certain setting, and the way his boss treated him in an interaction I wouldn't have been really fond of. But I seek that because I think the boss doesn't understand that he messed that up. And the employees now got a negative state that they're managing through. I got to work on both sides of that. Coaching's like that, and I would add to the mix of things I picked from Bo, integrity and competitiveness, is he had a work ethic that was really extraordinary. Now I will tease him posthumously. I'm 64, and he wished he hadn't retired when he did, because he lived much longer, because he was afraid of his heart, failing. It turns out that by living in the vitality, he lengthened his life.
Yeah.
And so hard work is another thing that you just throw in there. I mean, we could talk about what that means.
Kathy Hackett and Kathy Schembeckler, both in loyal service to their husbands. So you have been here on the job for a couple years, and having worked for Coach Harbaugh after he had been at Michigan for a couple years, you guys have a trait that is probably unique to high performers, in that they crave feedback. They're desperate for it,
yeah.
Right? And people are reluctant to give it, especially when you're at the top. So how is it that you extract that feedback so that you can make better decisions and you can build a company that's more inclusive and reflective of the integrity and the character of the whole?
Jim Harbaugh and I used to talk about this too, is when, because if you're competitive, because we want that spirit, and you're in an interactive moment where somebody's challenging you, your natural proclivity is, I'm going to go back at them. And there's a need for that, an intellectual assertiveness, I call it. So in business, this is constant because you're working on ideas. But that would be wrong to say all your ideas have to win, because then the company would fail. Jim and I used to have this discussion, and I would go on about it and say that the technique that I adopted was trying to be intellectually assertive. Can I ask more questions than make statements? So someone might say, well, look, Jim Hackett, working at Ford Motor Company is the worst experience I've ever had. I could challenge them on that. I go, okay, why would it be the worst? Where else have you been? And then when they answer that, you go further. And the questions are freeing in a way that you become a more active listener for feedback, but you discipline yourself in a way that says, I don't have to answer every one of these. I'm really just in pursuit of trying to find at the essential level, what's at work here, what's wrong. It works every time. And so I think of politicians or anyone who's in conflict, if you ask more questions first, you would serve yourself well.
And you're not going to deny their experience or their perception, which is their reality, so you're not calling them a liar or misrepresenting the truth or anything.
No,
like
even when someone, JT, is attacked, I don't have it often. I live a pretty good life, and so I feel good about this. But I've had people attack me, verbally, and I'll say, so you're obviously feeling something that is making you really angry. Yeah, you pissed me off. Okay, but what would make, you certainly don't walk around every day pissed off. What would make you so pissed off? And again, you keep unpacking it, you find that there's fear of failure, and lots of that, or anxiety. It drives people to be really angry if you're not doing something that's lacks integrity. Now, to bring this back up to the listeners, I would just say, so much of your life in leadership is about in service of others. That's a fourth Bo trait. Because if you think about yourself, narcissism is one of the worst diseases for CEOs, because everyone's telling you you're great and you get paid a lot of money and you're visible. You got to work the other way. I call it an anti-narcissistic vitamin every day. And what that means is, when I get up and I'm feeling sorry for myself, like being tired the way I am, I think there's somebody more tired than me.
Yeah.
And how can I help relieve that of them? So it's just conscious effort. And Bo was unbelievable when you would talk to him about who he was always in service of. He was helping the guy get a job. 2 days before he died, he's trying to help one of the quarterbacks get a bone marrow transplant. 2 days before Bo dies.
Yeah.
And he's frustrated. Recent research in psychology about people that are happy confirms this, that says if you have gratitude, first of all, and then if you're actually in service of others, you're actually a happier person. So he knew what he was doing, and I would attest to that. You have to work at this because narcissism's a natural force, right? I want to take care of myself first.
Simon Sinek said that there's a whole section in the libraries and in bookstores about self-help, but not about help others.
Yeah.
Right? And I've read The Go-Giver, which I love, and is a fundamental principle of that book is serving others and then being open to being helped yourself, and really powerful that way.
That's why you're here. No, really, because I think you one of the most selfless people I got to meet over there in Michigan, and so I thought, if you needed something, I want to be here for you to help you get your program going. So
I appreciate that exceedingly. Back to the competition element, there's talk about domestic labor and international labor and the UAW contract and automation, and so all of those forces exist combatively and competitively, but they can also be collaborative. You talk about the labor for the Mach-E and the factories down in Mexico, but then also the fact that you're churning out vehicles up here in Michigan, and so all of these seemingly competing forces can rise with an increase in output, right? I mean, are you thinking about there's a scenario and a world where all of these things get better and everything improves and you can kind of scratch all of those itches?
Well, that's a really insightful way to see it, because do you realize today the country's not losing more jobs to Mexico or China? But I've been in charge of an industrial business when there was a flight to China.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to attribute it to any one politician, but what I would attribute it to is this theory I just gave you in the beginning, which is there's a sense of things competing, right? And so China enabled the industrial system in the United States to get questioned and fractured. It created a catastrophe in terms of job loss. But what if it cycled back and made us better competitors in a world that's now globally competitive industrially? It did that. So our factories at Ford, we're on 3 shifts with the recent competitor of ours that was on strike. We have much higher utilization. We're much more fit because of global competition, because we have more factory employees in the United States producing vehicles than any other competitor. So we can't average our costs down by being not here. The decision to build the product in Mexico was because that's the only place I have new capacity. Everything else here is full. And this is cool because we're going to build more electric vehicles in the United States, but don't ask me to make the huge commitment capital-wise until I get the volume up. And once I do, there'll be a lot more jobs here.
It's a very stoic mindset. I'm thinking of Marcus Aurelius when you talk about how this competition and this challenge and this obstacle can also free you to achieving to higher heights, right? And it, when you look at competition, like Ohio State wouldn't be what it is without Michigan, right?
That's right.
So many times these competing forces are necessary for one another. Do you communicate that to your people? I mean, certainly people feel outside pressure and they see these external forces that are acting upon Ford. and they're worried, or they're getting emotions that don't serve them fruitfully in their vision for the company. Do you communicate that on a regular basis? I know last year you said, hey, that year wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are people feeling that type of competitive reinforcement that you've got?
They do. I always wish that I had, like Coach Harbaugh or Coach Schembechler's command of the room. You know, I was always told by my doctors to, you know, stay calm, keep your blood pressure down. You know, so I tried to build a management style that's intense but healthy. And so, not that those guys weren't, but you know what I mean. Some people can get away with that. I can't. But I borrowed when I was a sophomore at Michigan. Bo used this technique one year we were playing Ohio State, and you came in on Monday for the week of practice. He had all of our pictures next to the Ohio State player that was at our position. And it said, as Jim Hackett, I was a center, are you going to outplay? And there was the center from Ohio State. It wasn't, are you going to beat the middle guard? That's the listeners, that's the opposing person you block, which you do think about. He was saying, if you're a better center than they are, and our quarterback's a better quarterback than they are. So I translated that one day in a speech here. I said, every day, I better get up. I got to be better than Mary Barra, who's a really good executive at General Motors. And I turned to the head of HR. Are you better than Mary? Do you even know who their HR executive is? Are you better than they are? And yeah, it is about getting people in a centered way to see that fitness is, you have to contribute. Now, this isn't about adding stress or worry or anxiety. It just says you have to get yourself ready to compete. And so we don't just have that discussion and stop. We talk about what are the things that make up a fit executive, you know. And one of the first things we attack, and we don't want to take the time to go through them all, was the way decisions are made. Because people will talk about how long it takes or how many layers. We've really blown that up here. We had 16 layers from top to bottom in the company, which is an extraordinarily bureaucratic commercial company. You know, governments are like that. We got it down to 8. We cut it in half. We created a critical thinking model, which means when, unlike parts of the organization, engineers and designers or marketing and sales are in the room, how do they know how to communicate with each other to get to the bottom of things? The critical thinking is a framework so that no matter how you work in different parts of the company, you adopt this. It'd be like a cadence or a huddle, even though you're a tight end versus a tackle. There's something that makes your positions come together. Business needs that too. So I've done a couple podcasts on critical thinking. It's really a discipline for teams to work together. And it's gotten popular broadly in the notion of agile teams is something that's talked about in software companies. Is how do you get them to make decisions quickly? We were really on that years ago, and we've imported that into Ford. So all these things, there aren't 100 of them though, because you can confuse people. As the football coaches were feeding, didn't have 100 lessons. They just had a few, you know, that you and I have acknowledged. And I think I get to feel like a football coach and say, I feel like we've turned the corner, JT, because I was so foreign in terms of the auto industry that there's articles written about people didn't understand. I would say they didn't agree. To now where I'm not saying the things that they feel, and they're saying things that I now feel, like in the press all week about the Mach-E. They're talking about it in the way I wanted it to be 5 years ago.
How gratifying is that?
It's the kind of thing, because of the fitness pressure, you don't let yourself literally celebrate it. Yeah. I don't want you to think I can't be happy. It's just that this is the discipline where you get one day in football. It's similar in business. What I teach now, because I've been a CEO 25 years, I say, when you retire, you keep all those great letters and trophies and everything. Don't throw them away, because I did this once. I built a room down in my basement with all that crap, but it was never in my office because I'm too busy worrying about being fit and focused on competing. I don't want that to get in the way. So it's gratifying, but yet I'm not ready to absorb all that. I'm too busy working on the next thing.
a question back to the decision making, because I love the fact that you've made it more efficient and you've pared it down. And you mentioned agility, particularly from software companies. And I spoke with the CFO, or the CMO rather, of Xbox. And he mentioned a general term, and we talked about this a little bit, but just accelerating the feedback loop, right? And so not paralysis through analysis or incredible indecision. And so are you finding that you're making better, higher quality decisions by making them with as much possible accuracy as soon as possible? How do you think that you've reformed that decision-making process for the people inside your company to be more comfortable making decisions with fewer checks and balances or review processes?
We say in the complexity of decision making, because there's a lot of variables, people, time, we want to balance thinking and doing. So in history, I don't know why it got this way. It may have been the hunting gathering instincts we have, but action got rewarded more than thinking. So analysis that causes paralysis is a bad state too. So the question is, can you think just enough so that you can do with perfection or excellence? And so we call that a think phase. It has these rules so that you stay on track, and it's driving towards a point of view, which means that someone's going to make a decision. A decision is the big test of whether the thing's on track or not. Decisions really matter, and the clarity of the decision making is what establishes then the execution. Not, oh, did we make a decision here, or we still want to fight over it? So we have almost a ceremonial moment where we protect the thinking. We don't say hurry up or anything, but we say when we got that, we have a point of view. So an example of that is Mustang. It's in the press. Is, are we going to let this become a Mustang? And I said, don't make the decision yet. Let the think phase about how might we make it a Mustang. That's the question you use. Let that matriculate, and then there's a point of view ceremony. And actually I invited Bill Ford in because he's got such great instincts broadly, but he is a Mustang lover. And he snuck in, he says this, I said to Hackett, I can't imagine this ever being a Mustang. And I said, okay, but that's not today's decision. And when the team did the work, he came back, he goes, you know what, they did it, Jim. And I go, I know, I'm really proud of them. So critical thinking protects thinking and doing, rewards them uniformly. I sneak this in, JT, which is women in male cultures didn't have much of a chance, because instinctively they would want to talk about how they feel about something, and the men would say, this is my experience, not always, but you're younger, but in older cultures, the men would say, look, we don't have time for that, we got to go. And so they would reward themselves with saying, I'm shutting off the due consideration for how a customer might feel for the action. And then you get into the action and find out they didn't feel right about it. Well, let's fix it. It's too competitive. We have to have it right going in. And so that's how critical thinking got its chops, so to speak.
What's the review process like of the decisions made here? How does that layer into the process?
Well, there's a mechanism in critical thinking for these point of view, so that a team gets chartered, which means it gets the permission to do the think phase, and it has a point of view moment. One of the things you do is you have to acknowledge who the point of view owner is. Generally, it's not the CEO. I told this to the press. He goes, "Do you pick the taillight?" I go, "That would be a mistake."
That.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't be the guy to do that, because then I'm not making the team agile enough. What I do is help make sure it's clear who the point of view owner is, because there's lots of powerful people. And because we all salute that, Colonel Minnick, a friend of both of ours, calls that in the military world a salute moment, because the military couldn't work if they left the room and everybody was still wondering whether they made a decision. So we had him come and have dinner with us and explain that. So we have a salute moment where we all say that point of view is gold. Now, if you walked out of the room and you said, I still don't really believe in that, then you're disloyal to the process. If you walked out of the room and said, I thought of something that you didn't think about, there's a principle called new evidence. You can bring new evidence in that makes us undo the point of view. But if you use the court system as a proxy, it isn't because you just lost that you get to have a new case. You have to actually present the evidence for whether we'll open it again. which is really arduous. So it doesn't happen very often. In fact, in the time here at Ford, we've only had one new evidence undo a decision we were going to make.
Wow.
And probably 100 keep us on track.
Yeah. So the form or the system is certainly not an autocracy, and it's got democratic principles, but it's mostly a meritocracy, right? Like you are truly enabling and allowing, you know, the cream to rise to the top, so to speak.
The fitness.
The fitness, of course.
The fitness of the thinking
Uh-huh.
will derive and you have to have fitness of leaders who can make choices. That's a term we use, choices. And then once those two things are done, the fitness of the thinking and the choice making, then you move into this, it's really rigorous execution mode, that's about hitting dates on stages, and we use a lot of swim lane kind of charts that measure people's progress, data rich. And we had a failure this year that was significant in our Explorer launch that we've unpacked as a team and said, we know better, we should do better. It'd be like fumbling on the goal line.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I used that phrase with the Ford family. And I know exactly what went wrong and how it's going to make us better. But yeah, in a serial way, what caused this to happen is that in history, decision making was top down because the person at the top had more information. Now with the nature of networks and the way information, the person at the top has the least information probably. And so the speed and enabling of agility comes from giving people as much information as you can, paired with a process that everyone, if you're not in the room, will recognize. Because if you just had information and you couldn't recognize how decisions were made, you could call that malpractice. And so these two things feed each other in a really cool way, and so we're speeding up the company.
Are you finding that with your values-based outlook and making decisions with integrity, and then with a little bit tighter guardrails around the process, that you are finding some really truly remarkable and dynamic leaders inside of your organization, like unearthing outstanding potential in people that you feel like are going to be future CEOs or C-suite executives, like up and down the company?
Well, I've witnessed them in this process.
Yes. And
that's where I find the talent. I can find thinkers, I can find point of view owners, I can find execution. The rare one is somebody who can do all three. I'm getting called, I'm sorry.
Got it. No, that's all right. I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
JT, thanks for being here, and would you come back?
I promise.
Because I'd like to do a better job of helping the world see some of the very secular things about Ford and the things that we've pioneered and mastered in a way that I think are going to be special. Like I'll sneak this in the Mustang Mach-E. The nature of interfaces in a vehicle for humans has really not been explored in the way that we're trying to do. Because, the accident rate went up with distractions from people texting. So this says we still don't have all that right as a world, and how can you have both? And so the Mach-E actually addresses some of that.
Well, thankfully we have you spearheading the autonomous driving technology too.
Yes, that'd be fun to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.